Part 2, Chapter 3. If he had been 20 to 30 pounds lighter and 20 years younger, General Hubert Dannel Boone would have been a dead ringer for Colin Clive in Frankenstein. Small nose, deep-set eyes, slicked back hair, albeit greyish-brown, not Clive black. A patrician air of superiority bordering on loathing. Hale didn't know why, but he liked the 60-year-old. As Deakins and Hale walked in, Boone was sitting behind his big gunmetal desk, looking at a map on his computer screen. Two young aides were behind him, hunched over the screen. "General," the flyers said, saluting. "Good evening, gentlemen," Boone said. He looked up and touched the side of an index finger to his forehead. His aides acknowledged the men with a nod, then did a Siam slink through a rear door into the small situation room. "I've got a secret and I'm not telling," Hale thought as he read their expressions. He didn't know whether to be worried or excited, and ended up with a taste of both. Boone's eyes settled on Deakins and remained there. "Major, is my name Rip Van Winkle?" Deakins looked at him curiously. "Sir?" "Have I been sleeping and you were recently promoted past me?" No, sir," Deakins said. Boone's eyes drifted to the red and white no smoking sign on the wall. "Then why are you smoking in my briefing room?" "Holy infraction," Deakins said. He plucked the cigarette from his mouth. "May I?" he asked, leaning towards a pentagon ashtray on the desk. "No, you may not," Boone replied. "I got that from Omar Bradley himself." "Oops, sorry," Deakins said. He straightened, crushed the cigarette out between his thumb and index finger, and slipped the dead butt into his pocket. Hale was wearing a "didn't I warn you" expression. The Major shook his head. "What's the mission profile, sir?" Deakins asked. Boone sat back. "You're to simulate a low-level border penetration. Hug the ground." "Scare some cows," Hale said. "And piss off some farmers, assuming they can spot you." "The usual," Deakins said. "Not exactly, Deke," Boone said. "Tonight it's going to be a little unusual. You'll be carrying a couple of nukes, gentlemen." Hale and Deakins swapped looks. Hale's was one of disbelief, Deakins one of delight. "Real ones?" Hale asked. "The genuine articles," Boone replied. "Palmdale's concerned about low-level gamma and X-ray diffusion screwing up the peripherals in the aircraft. So they asked us to send a couple on the run, see if anything lights up." "61s?" Hale asked. Boone shook his head slowly. "Big ones." "83s," Deakins said. Boone nodded. "Ooh," Hale said. "Crowd pleasers." "Yes," said Boone, his eyes fastened on Deakins. "And Deke." "Sir?" "Do me a favor." "Anything, sir." "Don't give the security boys a hard time this afternoon." Deakins appeared hurt. "Sir, I assure you I have a lot of respect for—" "Save the bullshit for the waitresses at Chow Fats," Boone said. "Yes, sir." The general lifted a sheet of paper and shook it. Hale could see Whiteman AFB Security, eyes only, printed in bold red letters across the top. "I know about the Boogerman sticker you pasted on your ID yesterday, and the Michelson's gym membership card from 1968 that you tried to pass off 2 days before that." Deakins said, "I was just trying to keep things loose, sir. It can get a little hairy out there sometimes." "I sympathize," Boone said. "And since you're also one of my best pilots, I'm going to overlook these complaints." "Thank you from the bottom of my heart." Deakins bowed slightly. "For now," the general added. "One more incident like these, and I'm going to ground you for a month of Sundays. Got that?" "Loud and clear, sir." Boone shook his head. "I don't like to threaten a man of your caliber, but I don't run this base for your amusement." "No, you certainly do not, sir." Boone folded the paper and tore it in two. "Now, gentlemen, have yourselves a good flight, and I'll see you on your return." "Yes, sir," both men said, saluting. "And thank you, sir," Deakins added. "Thank you very much." Boone motioned him out with a wave of his hand. As the men turned and left, Hale wondered whether Boone had tasted Deakins' insincerity beneath its thin candy shell, or if it was necessary to share a cockpit and adjoining lockers to read Deakins that well. Or could it be denial? Hale wondered. Deakins was Boone's boy, hand-picked 17 years ago out of flight school and given all the juicy new planes. They'd been together ever since. The general didn't think bad thoughts about him unless he saw them in writing. And even then, as today, he cut him slack thick as a couple of time zones. However, if Boone had been a little melancholy, Deakins was anything but. His step was jaunty as they headed through the outer office of the administration building, towards the field and the row of hangars. Chapter 4. The ghosts were everywhere. Hale saw them, heard them, felt them. Beside him, Deakins was oblivious to the ghosts. But to Hale, they were like pterodactyls in the museum of his memory. The test planes that had flown here and at the other bases he'd been to. There were pale shadows of the Silver Bell X series of Mac breakers, the camouflage green Boeing Stratofortresses, and the thundering blue B-29s. He could hear the whoosh of the white Grumman F-14A Tomcats, the rumble of the ivory grey Hawkeyes and Prowlers. Ever since he was a kid in Texas, growing up with an uncle who worked for the Space Center in Houston, he wanted to go fast. First on horses, then in cars, finally in planes. He followed the space flights. The earliest he could remember was Apollo 7 in October of 1968, with Skirrer, Eisel, and Cunningham on board. But being an astronaut didn't seem hands-on enough for Riley Hale. Even the launch, one of the gut-rumblingest and most powerful experiences to watch, was a spectator sport for the astronaut. Hale wanted to control his vehicle. He wanted the excitement of riding and breaking the Bronco. And fear? Of course it was there. The fear of screwing up, the fear of being maimed. But even if he'd ended up on his back, taking a long dirt nap, at least he'd have the privilege of dying with his boots on. And that meant a lot. Hale breathed in the mixture of fresh air and fuel. Even when he was flying solo, the smells and history and hardware all made him feel part of the community of flyers. An eternal brotherhood that not even death could take from him. The bomb truck reached the hangar at the same time they did. "Hey, Mike," Deakins said to the driver. "How's Megan doing?" Better, Major," said the youthful airman in camouflage trousers and a brown t-shirt. "Baby's gaining weight too." "Glad to hear it," Deakins said. "Tell your wife hi for me, and give that baby a kiss." The driver nodded and drove off. "Nice guy," Deakins said, "and his wife's a real piece. Ever met Meg?" "No," Hale said. Deakins smacked his lips. "Quite a party girl in her day. Used to need 3 men to... I don't want to hear it, Hale said. You've got this remarkable talent for knowing the tawdriest things about people. Deakins frowned. Not tawdry. Exciting. Alive. There's nothing wrong with enjoying life, Pard. Nothing at all. Hale shook his head as they approached the sentry at the hangar door. The hangar was new and modern, built as part of the expansive modernization program at Whiteman. Formerly the home of Minuteman II and III missiles, it had been converted from 1988 to 1991 to handle the B-2A bomber and other stealth aircraft. What the pros of the 509th Wing referred to as low observables. Prior to the resurfacing of the runways and construction of 6 new hangars and support buildings, planes hadn't operated from the base since 1962. The guard saluted, after which Deakins and Hale allowed her to examine their clip-on IDs. Deakins grinned wryly as he wiggled his undefaced card at her. Hale gave him a "cut it out" look. The sentry pulled a black device from a loop in her belt. It was the size of a remote control unit, and she checked the up-to-the-minute duty roster on the LCD display near the top. "Go ahead, Captain Hale, Major Deakins," she said, saluting again, her own ID reflecting the sunlight. "Thank you," Deakins said, returning the salute. Hale entered first. Light cascaded into the hangar as the large door was opened to admit the bomb truck. The sunlight rolled in, lighting the bomber from bottom to top, illuminating the red letters spelling out Spirit 7 on the inside of the bomb bay doors. The Northrop B-3 was a black, flying wing, even flatter and smoother than the B-2A. Though it had the familiar double W trailing edge formation, the hatchet wings were swept back even further than the B-2A's 30 degrees, making for a smaller surface area, while the main fuselage was nearly a foot flatter. Unlike the B-2A, the nacelles were nearly flush with the wing surface, while the beaver tail and wing flaps had been redesigned to give greater lift and increase the bomber's range. In flight, in both the visual and radar spectrums, this plane was more than just low observable. It was practically invisible. Hence the plane's nickname, the Ghost. The bomb bay doors were open, and the ground crew stood ready to load the cargo. Hale and Deakins greeted everyone with a hello and a smile, though Deakins was the more velvety. Both men carried themselves with the aloofness that became their status as crack pilots. The warlike Ares, sun-drenched Apollo, and fleet Hermes, an Olympian hat-trick packed tightly into one cockpit. "You still got attitude," Hale said behind his smile. "Why is that, Deke? Why does everyone have to kiss your ass?" "Because for 20 years I've been putting that ass on the line a couple of times a week. It's golden, Hale. Solid, Sutter's Mill vintage gold ass. If we get a glitch in some squat-sized chip in the stabilization augmentation system, then that ass is slag. So while it's whole, while it's mine, it deserves to be revered." Hale said, "How come I take those same risks and don't feel the way you do?" Deakins paused on the bottom of the crew entry steps, beside the cockpit, and looked right back at his partner. "Because like I said before, you don't like to fight." "And like I've told you before," Hale said, "if you've got to fight to show someone your ass is gold, then your cheeks must not be shining too bright." "Not true," Deakins said. "Someone's got their back to the sun, you got to turn them around. They don't want to look, you've got to pull them around." Hale shook his head. "I love you, but I don't know why we bother to talk about these things. Even with me, you fight. We just go around and around. Hey, Deke said with a grin. You think Patty and Kathy Lane got along all the time? Who? Cousins, Deakins said. Identical cousins. Never mind. While the bombs were being clamped into place in the rotary racks behind them, Deakins pulled on his helmet. Then he turned and hopped up the retractable silver ladder that was mounted to the left and rear of the nose wheel, 5 straight-up rungs into the cockpit. He pulled himself through the underbelly hatch and into the right-hand seat. Hale climbed into the left-hand seat, and as the hatch was closed, the men strapped themselves in. The cockpit was surprisingly roomy from side to side. The control stick and throttle quadrant were similar to those of a conventional aircraft, and 2 large, angled, kite-shaped windscreens in front and 2 smaller rectangles on the side gave them a visual range of 270 degrees. But the crew rarely used the windows. Flying the B-3 was done primarily via the 4 cathode ray tube multifunction displays arrayed in a T formation in front of each pilot, 3 on the top and 1 underneath. The full-color screens provided duplicate information, left and right, about weather conditions, target data, radar readings, fuel consumption, and more. Topographic maps from above or straight on could be brought up with the touch of a key. Deakins was all business now. He and Hale went through the pre-flight checklist, ranging from cockpit pressurization and air conditioning to making sure the Ace's 2 upward flying ejection seats were armed and functional. They communicated with the tower, and when the bombs had been loaded, the alarm horns sounded and the bomber was rolled out. As Deakins guided the plane to the runway, Hale brought up the flight plan. So, what's it to be? My guess is Wyoming. Deakins glanced at the monitor. Utah. Hale smiled. Well, it's about time. Damn Mormons with those TV commercials that make you feel guilty about yelling at your kids. Hell yeah. Let's nuke the beehive state. He threw a tiny pair of left jabs towards the windscreen. How's that for fight, partner? Deakins grinned. Real good, Hale. Real good. Reaching the runway, Hale put his gloved hand atop Deakins, which was on the throttle. Upon receiving a final go from the tower, they powered up the B-3 almost soundlessly. Mounted in pairs in the center of the fuselage, outboard of the twin bomb bays, the 4 General Electric F118 GE100 non-water-burning engines poured out 19,000 pounds of thrust each. They were equipped with various stealth systems, which mixed the exhaust with surrounding air to disperse it, while contrail formation was minimized by chemicals fed into the exhaust stream. However, the pride of Northrop was the S-shaped inlet, which reduced to practically nil the engine compressor face radar return. As the bomber moved forward, the leading edges of the plane sliced cleanly through the air, their dielectric radar-absorbing material whispering defiance as they rose. Instead of climbing towards its maximum tested height of 45,000 feet, Deakins guided the plane to just over half that altitude as it slashed towards the sinking sun.